Superman 75 came out on this day 20 years ago, and there were 2 covers you could buy if you wanted to go, and good luck, because they actually, DC Comics went, I think, to the 4th or 5th printing on this issue, and that would have been not on this day. They actually ran out of this first print. This is a first print of the, what we call the newsstand version. Newsstand means that I could walk into Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, and I could get this, right, in a bookstore or in an actual newsstand where newspapers are sold. I could go and buy this issue if I was lucky enough to find it. I could also get it in a comic book shop if I had one near me, or a bookstore in a mall, things that sometimes gas stations had comic books, so if they were carrying them then, you would have been able to get it. Superman 75, this is what's called the mass market newsstand edition, and it went off the shelves. There you can see Superman's cape draped over a stake there, a piece of wood, and it shows that, hey, it's not good for the Man of Steel. Now, what we call the direct market, this only goes to comic book shops, and if you don't own a comic book shop or know where there's a comic book shop, there's no internet, mind you, there's no eBay, there's no online comic book store, you're not getting this issue, okay, because this was the bag. Now, I've only got the bag here because I opened the issue. But this was the bag that the special edition of Superman 75 came in, and as you can tell, it's a tombstone motif. Or no, it's not. I'm sorry. The cover's a tombstone. It's a bleeding S, though. It's a black S or a red S against a black background, bleeding, which puts a fine point on the death of the death of Superman. Now, if you bought this, some people would not open this. Some people were buying 30, 40 copies, easy, of this issue. Right, this collector's version, they were not opening them, because if you opened the pack, this is a black bag, what you see in here. If you open this, then you were going to diminish the value of the comic book inside. Again, people were thinking collector's market. So in this bag, which I've bagged here separately, because I have 2 copies of this, I didn't buy 40, I only bought 2. Inside, you had a number of additional things that came with that issue. That were really cool. First of all, here is a collector's card. Trading cards were still pretty big back in the 90s. And here you have, it's a trading card copy or version shrunk down of the special edition cover, which I'm about to show you, the tombstone. It says, "Here lies Earth's greatest hero," and it's got the S shield on it. Also, let me show you they actually made a fake Daily Planet. You know, that's the newspaper that Clark Kent works for and all of his friends. And, of course, he's Superman. They made an obituary for Superman, because in the comic book universe that this takes place in, they had to write an obituary. Superman died. And no one ever thought we would see an obituary for Superman. So that was a neat, really brilliant idea to do that. So that came in the special. You had to buy the black-bagged version. This is a poster. I'm not going to open it because it has actually been in the bag untouched for, I don't think I've opened these since 1992. I kid you not. I think I read this once, bagged it, so it's been there for 20 years. So opening it today, I thought I would do. I did it very carefully, and I'm not going to show you that. This is just a backboard that keeps the spine of the book nice and straight. And here's the comic itself. That's the most important thing, the story. This is the cover of the special edition of Superman number 75, where Superman meets his death in fighting Doomsday. And there's a fold-out, which was such a neat idea. There's a fold-out cover here, or a page, I should say, and after Superman has defeated Doomsday, Superman himself dies in Lois Lane's arms. Now, Lois, at this time, in the comic books, Lois Lane knew that Clark Kent was Superman. And yet no one else knew, except for his parents, who were still alive, his adoptive parents. And so when Clark Kent disappears, right, because he's Superman and Superman's dead, that was a whole thing they had to explain. So it was really brilliantly done. So what was so amazing about this was that Superman died, and as a teenager and as a guy who did not know a whole lot, enough about comics back then to really understand, I thought this was it. I read this issue, Superman 75, and I got the special edition of it, and I got the regular edition that I showed you. And I thought, this is it. You know, this is Superman's death. And then the 6 issues that came out after that were actually called Funeral for a Friend. And that was the real meat of the story. Because the 6 issues here, where Superman fights this big... Imagine the Hulk more powerful than he is, okay, you know, from like the Avengers and all, but with these bony, sharp things coming out of his arms, and he beats the crap out of Superman, and Superman beats the crap out of him, and their very last punches together, they knock each other out, and they both die. Now, I thought that was it. I thought, the end. Superman's done. Then they did this 6-issue Funeral for a Friend, and I thought, well, okay, they're still going to publish those, so maybe Superman will come back at the end. And the very last issue has Superman's adopted father, who's Jonathan Kent, right? He and his wife Martha found Superman when he was a baby, when he crashed on Earth. And that issue has Jonathan dying, okay, because he has a heart attack when he, after he see, because Martha and Jonathan couldn't go to the funeral. They had a state funeral for Superman. It's in one of the funeral issues that I don't have here, out right now. And they actually had the Clintons there. They had every superhero in the DC universe there. They had some of them as pallbearers for Superman. And they're watching on television, the Kents, and they can't go mourn their son. So they go out and they bury some of his belongings in the hole where the ship landed all those years ago to say goodbye. Well, Jonathan eventually has a heart attack and he's in the hospital. And the very last panel of that issue, which was the end, because it's actually the end of that issue says, no, next month nothing. There are no more comics. Superman comics are done. And it actually says the end, and Jonathan dies. And so you're thinking they're ending it this way, and for 2 months there are no more Superman comics. Now you have to understand, comic books are monthly publications, and Superman, for example, has been in constant publication for it'll be 75 years in 2013. Okay, so every Wednesday a new comic book comes out. And in most cases it's been for a very long time, and in others it hasn't been. But in the case of Superman, Batman, 75 years, 74 years. That's a long time, kids. Okay? And so this was huge, and I thought, man, I can't believe it, because I read this story. It was the first Superman story that I actually sat down and read, and by the end of this 6-part story, I was in love with this character, because he had put himself, laid his life down, he had risked his life, and without any thought for his own safety, had died saving not only Metropolis, but the whole planet. And I thought, man, this guy is great. And for me, it was really not a conversion, right? But it was kind of a turning away for me from some of the dark stuff, because it was really, the dark stuff was really depressing. You would read it, and it was just, it kind of, especially the Spawn stuff that I mentioned earlier, horrible. It would leave you with this dark feeling, and Superman was very hopeful. Well, Superman eventually, of course, came back. And the story of how he came back is very exciting. It's maybe even more exciting than the death of Superman. And it took a year plus a little bit of change to get the story of Superman coming back. And what DC did, what the writers and the artists did very intelligently, was they actually had 4 guys that could be Superman. They had one that looked like a cyborg, that looked like Superman rebuilt because he's dead and parts of his body are so damaged they had to rebuild him as a machine. They had one guy that looked just like Superman, but he was dark, he was violent, he had new powers, so it looked like maybe he had died and then he somehow came back to life, but he wasn't the same. Then you had Superboy, who was actually a clone of Superman, and he claimed to be the real Superman, just reborn as a clone. And then you had this other guy who didn't claim to be Superman at all. He was called Steel, but he was the most like Superman when it came to doing the right thing. These other 3 guys, not so much. So you had a whole year. It was like a soap opera for those that watched that. It was like this ongoing serial fiction where you're like, well, I don't know who's going to be who. And every week, man, I would drive every Friday. Most people were going home, going ready to go out to the football game or do whatever it is that non-nerds did as teenagers. And I was going to the comic shop on Friday afternoons, driving there and getting my fix. What's going to happen? I went every week. Well, when is Superman going to be back? And are they going to reveal it in this issue and this issue? And finally, a little year or so later, about, Superman did come back. And so it didn't take away from the fact that he had died, because he'd actually died, and you saw the effect that had on people in his universe, in all of his supporting characters, and it was really, really well done. So the death of Superman, for me, the death and the return of Superman are, I think, they're probably my absolute favorite comic book stories. That, to me, it doesn't get any better. What you can do with comic books, you look at that story and you see. So I just wanted to just give a little history. Why did they kill him off? It's interesting. It was sales were pretty weak on the Superman books at the time, and the other reason was it wasn't to make money. It wasn't, well, part of it was to make money, but the other reason was that ABC was making a Superman TV show, and the comic book writers had actually been building up the year before they killed Superman. They had been building up to him marrying Lois Lane because he had told her that he was really Superman, right? Clark Kent had. And so they were going to get married, and that was going to be, Superman 75 was actually going to be a wedding issue. Well, then the TV show, the bigwigs that run the TV department said, look, we want, when you do the marriage story in the comics, we want it to tie into when we marry them on the TV show, because it's going to be a romantic show, Lois and Clark, it was called, and we want to do that together, so put that off. And they had already plotted it. The comic book writers at this time were plotting the stories out for a whole year. And so then they all got together. They were very unhappy about this, as you could imagine. But then they said, all right, well, we've got to come up with something else. And they'd always joked about, what if we killed him? And this time they said, we're going to kill him because we don't have anything else to do. And that led to a year of stories, and a year of wonderful stories. So this became a huge phenomenon. You had people rushing into the comic shops thinking that this was permanent. You had people running in, buying multiple copies. It brought people in who never read comics before, much less Superman, and it kept them as fans. And that's why today, anytime there's news of something going on in the comic books, it will be on some news station, CNN, Fox News. I'm going to put in here at the closing of this video, I'm going to have a clip from a news story circa 1992, which it's really cheesy, but again, it was 1992. One of the things that came with, also, that I didn't mention, that came with that special edition of Superman 75, these are stamps that came with the issue, which back then, stamps, I mean, you know, people knew what those were. But this is probably my favorite thing. I think it's the coolest thing that came with Superman 75. It's a Superman armband that you wear in mourning. And what was so neat was that in the funeral, when they finally buried Superman, all the heroes and all the people in the story were wearing this armband, and everybody got to have their own Superman armband. And it has DC Comics, copyright 1992, printed in the good old US of A, right? So that is about the comics. Now, roughly around that time, I think maybe it was probably right after the return of Superman, brilliantly, the story was still popular enough that Nintendo got in on the business, and they released a Nintendo game for the Super Nintendo, and this is it. It's called The Death and Return of Superman. And I spent many an hour playing this game as a kid. So there was any chance of me not being a nerd, I went from reading the comics to playing the game. And here it is, The Death and Return of Superman, which I still have and love to play, and plan to play a little bit today on the 20th anniversary. Because I'm a nerd? No. Look, I'm happy about being a nerd, okay? But I know some people have to call me that, and that's fine. And then, back in, oh, geez, kids, this was in, I want to say that this was back in 09, or maybe 2010. No, it was 09. This was released, Superman Doomsday, and it was a animated full-length, meaning it's over an hour long, Superman, the Death of Superman story. Now, they had to change a lot in the comics, because a story that takes a year to tell in print, you're going to have more than 78 minutes to do it on video. But they shortened it, they made some changes. But the best part of this, I think, if you want to rent this, you can get it on Netflix. The best part is the fight that Superman has with Doomsday. In Superman movies, real life movies, you know, real actors, live action, he's always fighting things. He's fighting like missiles, or, you know, he's doing super things to save people, but he never really gets to wail on anybody. And in this, you get the closest we'll see to Superman just wailing on this Doomsday guy, and Doomsday doing the same thing with him, and ultimately they both die. Now, So that you can go out and rent if you're interested in it. It's a pretty good flick. So folks, today is the 20th anniversary of the death of Superman. I was actually going to wait until the 25th anniversary to do anything special, like to actually talk about it. But I'm not guaranteed 5 years from now. No one is. Who knows? I'm not guaranteed 5 minutes from now. I hope. I hope, Lord. But I wanted to talk about it today because it's a pretty special moment for me. It's one of my, again, it's probably my favorite comic book story. It means a lot to me. So I'm going to end this episode here with a clip showing you the effect that this was having. That this, again, went into all the media at the time. There was no internet, but it was in magazines, it was in newspapers, and then it was even on television. And this you're going to see here on the end, tail end of my stuff, is a video from back in that time. Folks, tomorrow night, 9 p.m., please tune in for the next episode of The Big Radio Show with Chris Meaux. You can go to blogtalkradio.com and type in The Big Show with Chris Meaux, and it'll take you to my page there. You can also look on Facebook, The Big Radio Show with Chris Meaux. That'll bring you to the page, and there you'll find a link to tomorrow night's show. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to all my listeners out there. Have a happy Death of Superman Day, and happy Thanksgiving to you. I certainly won't see you before then, and you won't see me, but you'll hear from me. Thanks for watching.